like us to give a big welcome to Stout.
I'm just a girl to change your world. Girl next door, you're looking for. Take notice, I'm right here. I'm just the girl to change your world. Yeah.
I thought a lot about what I'd say tonight, and I first have to tell you, Watonga's a big city from where I grew up. Can't hear me? Can you hear me now? I grew up in rural Wyoming, and a population of Carpenter was about 100, so coming to a city like Watonga would have been a big deal. My mother and father owned the grocery store, and my mother was the postmaster, not the postmistress. She made that very, very clear. And every year I go back for my high school reunion. And I got to thinking, as I was looking at knowing who I would be speaking to tonight, I wanted to think about two different things. First of all, I will talk to you about the power of volunteering in a minute. But before I do, I want to talk to you about the defining moments that sometimes change our lives forever. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of my own. And one of the first defining moments for me was when I was growing up, and I had a wonderful music teacher named Mr. Lantos, who was a Hungarian refugee after the Second World War and had come into New York, and then luckily for me ended up in Wyoming, and was my teacher. And we were going to be playing for the governor at the governor's mansion in Wyoming. Typical teenager, I forgot my music. And I said, I can't play, I don't have my music. And I remember him looking at me and going, Umbashak, I believe in you and you will play. And I did. And I suddenly realized I knew more than I thought I did. And he gave me a tremendous amount of confidence. The next great defining thing I can honestly say to you that happened to me was in 1966, and I know it's a long time, Terry, but I got to tell the story. In 1966, I flew to Seoul, Korea, all by myself to join my husband, who was in the military. Intellectually, my parents knew I was in a safe country. Emotionally, they felt I was in Vietnam. Because in 1966, Seoul, Korea was pretty much still a third world country. I became pregnant and wanted to tell my parents that they were going to be grandparents. I didn't want to send them a Western Union telegram because they'd faint before they read it. And I didn't want to send them a letter because it took 3 weeks. So I thought, I'll call them. How many of you have watched MASH on TV? Okay, radar wasn't exaggerating. I started trying to call my mother and dad in rural Wyoming, and I'm an only child, so there was a lot of pressure on me. It took me 2 weeks to get to Wyoming. I could always get to Tokyo. I frequently got to Hawaii, and a couple of times I got to Alaska. But it wasn't until I heard the operator in Denver, Colorado say, just a moment, please. I thought, I'm going to get him. My mother answered the phone, and I said, Mom, it's Kay. Everything's okay. You're going to be grandparents. And the phone went dead. But they knew. Here was the defining moment for me over a period of time. That child, Doug, gave me my first granddaughter in the year 2000. He called me on the phone and said, Mom, get to your computer. I'm going to have pictures of your granddaughter in about 3 hours. They lived in Anchorage, Alaska. He was in search and rescue for the Coast Guard. I got home, sat in front of my computer and waited, and here came the email with these pictures of Katie, my granddaughter, and I thought, oh wow, this is the coolest thing in the world. And that was from 1966 to the year 2000. Just go forward 4 years. My youngest son is in Matarin, Venezuela. We tend to travel a lot in our family. He's in Matarin, Venezuela, which is pretty much an isolated part of Venezuela. And he calls me on the phone and says, Mom, get to your computer. We're on our way to the hospital for Nicole to be born. Now picture what I'm going to tell you. I watched Nicole being born in Matarin, Venezuela. He had a camera hooked to a laptop that had an antenna that, went up in the air, and it came down to my computer, and I drank coffee and watched Nicole enter the world. Now come forward to the year 2011. We're just a few years, 6 years, almost 7. And I now read to my granddaughter on radio on my computer because she and I can be looking at the same book. She's in Texas, they're going to Dubai, I don't want to talk about it. I'll still have radio with me. And she and I are looking at the same book and turning the pages together, even though we're not together. Those were defining moments in my life and made me who I was and who I became today. Certainly, living in Seoul, Korea made me an American and made me a patriot. I did not know what it meant to be an American until I had lived with rats that chewed through my wall, and then I knew. So now I'm going to go forward to what I've done as a volunteer, and I wanted to relate to you, for you to think of the defining moments in your lives when you were younger. By the way, it's so nice to see so many white-haired people just like me. Remembering back to when you weren't white-haired. Think of the music teachers, English teachers, friends, and people that said one thing to you that changed your life forever. This was so brought home to me recently. As I said, I go home every year for my high school reunion. At my, I'll be very honest, my 50th high school reunion, my 4th grade teacher, who was only 10 years older than I was, that's another story. I met her in Denver at the airport, and we drove to Wyoming, and on the way, she had been a school teacher for 30-some years, and she said, "Kay, I'm worried." I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, I'm going to see Jerry Foster, and he's the only kid I ever double promoted in all my 30 years of teaching. I've often wondered if I did the right thing." And I said, "Well, he's going to be there, so you get to ask him." So we get to the reunion, and I see Jerry over in the corner, and so I make a beeline for him, and Judy's, talking to everybody else, and I said, "Jerry," he says, "Is Mrs. Denny here?" I said, "Yes, she is. She's with me. I got to talk to her." And I'm thinking, oh boy. So we walk back. Now, when I tell you where Jerry ended up, you'll understand. We get together, and Jerry's probably 6'4", and Judy's not. So Judy's looking up at Jerry, and Jerry's looking down at Judy, and he says, "Mrs. Denny, I have something to say to you." And she said, "So do I to you." And he said, "No, I have to say it first." And she said, "Okay." And he said, "Mrs. Denny, in the 4th grade, you told me I was smart and that I could be somebody, and you promoted me so that I could learn more. And I owe everything I have because you believed in me." Now we're all crying. And he says, "What did you want to tell me, Mrs. Denny?" And she said, "Nothing, thank you." He had gone on to Rensselaer Polytech, got his PhD in engineering, and had retired from the University of Colorado as an engineer. That one statement in 4th grade, when she double promoted this bright young boy, changed his life forever. All of you as volunteers are going to reach out and change the life of somebody that you may not realize you're doing it at the time, but you are. What I'm going to challenge you to do is to pay it forward the following way. Find 2 more people just like you to do what you're doing, and expand your volunteering efforts, because the more you pay it forward, the more people's lives you touch, and the difference it's going to make for you. How many of you have seen the movie The Blind Side? Raise your hands. For those of you that haven't seen it, talk to those who raised their hands. It is a true story of a woman in Memphis, Tennessee, and she was a tiny, petite, well-to-do white lady. And this big African-American homeless boy came into her life, and she took him in. He's Michael Orr. He's now the left tackle for the Baltimore Ravens. But that story is the most heartwarming story of what happens when you reach out and touch someone. So my challenge to you tonight is to go back, remember the defining moments in your life that made you who you are. Think about how you have reached out and touched other people's lives. Pass it forward, because volunteering is what changes lives forever.